At 21, the youngest and only black member in the office, every step forward feels like a quiet battle. The stolen glances, the forced smiles, subtle reminders that you don't quite belong. You sit at your desk, buzz of the office fading beneath the weight in your chest. It's not until your routine bi-weekly meeting with Adrian, your mentor, that you finally ask yourself, how much longer can you ignore it? You've always been driven. Graduating with a 2-1 in English literature was supposed to be your ticket to a future you had imagined, a world where hard work meant opportunity. Sitting in the office of your first job as a junior account manager in Birmingham, something feels off. The air is different, colder. You're the only black person on your team, and it's not just a fact, it's a feeling, a quiet presence that follows you everywhere. You grew up hearing your parents talk about resilience and ambition, but now those lessons are being tested in ways that are both exhausting and painfully revealing. At first, you tell yourself it's just nerves, just the adjustment period. But as the weeks pass, the discomfort doesn't fade, it grows. The moments of exclusion are subtle, yet impossible to ignore. In meetings, your ideas are brushed aside. Conversations shift when you enter the room, and then, during a team lunch, it happens. A colleague makes an offhand comment about a client's unfamiliar reaction to you. Laughter follows, but not from you, because you know exactly what's being said between the lines. You force a smile, swallowing a knot in your throat, but inside, something sharp and unshakable begins to form. Anger, isolation, the weight of being seen as an exception rather than an equal. You push forward, hoping time will smooth out the edges of this discomfort. Maybe if you work harder, stay quieter, blend in more, it will stop feeling like this. But it doesn't. The weight of being the other presses down on you, growing heavier with every passing day. And then, one evening, it all catches up. You walk through the door, drop onto the couch, and let out a breath you didn't even realize you were holding. Your mother watches you for a moment before she asks, "What's wrong?" You open your mouth to answer, but the words fail you. Finally, you whisper the only thing that feels true. "I don't know if I belong there." This was the first time you felt like you had to prove your worth to just exist in a space. Before this job, you were a student. University had its challenges, but it was a space that made sense. A world filled with books, ideas, and people that seemed to value what you had to say. Your identity felt fluid there. You were Marcus, a student with dreams, not a statistic or a checkbox on someone's diversity report. Discussions about race weren't uncomfortable. They were open, shared amongst friends who wanted to understand, who listened. In that space, you could celebrate your culture, take pride in your history, and exist without constantly having to prove yourself. But the professional world is different. The unspoken rules here aren't the same. Growing up, your parents had prepared you for this in their own way. They spoke about perseverance, about how the world might not always see your blackness the way you do, as a source of strength, pride, and history. Around the dinner table, the conversations were filled with love, but also realism. Work twice as hard, be twice as good. The world may not always be fair, but you can carve out a place for yourself. You believed them. You still do. But now, sitting in this office, you wonder, how do you keep believing in yourself when the world refuses to see your worth? In university, the playing field felt level. You weren't the only one in the room. You were one of the top students, recognized for your intellect and passion for literature. Professors encouraged diverse perspectives, and when you spoke, it was because your insights mattered, not because someone needed to tick a box. But here, it feels different. You work hard, your achievements, your voice, it all seems to disappear behind the color of your skin. And the hardest part, the doubt creeping in, the quiet voice asking, did I ever really belong in the first place? Have you ever stepped into a space where you felt unseen, no matter how much you had to offer? Your routine bi-weekly catch-up with Adrian, your mentor, the only person who truly understands what you're going through, turns into something more. Starting off as a junior, like yourself, he worked his way up to account director based in a London branch, and, like you, he's also a black male. He's been in the industry longer than you, fought the same battles, carried the same weight, and yet, on the screen before you, he sits steady, sure of himself. You envy that. Then, he says something that stops you cold. You can't just sit back and wait for things to change. You've got to show them who you are. If you don't take the lead, they'll never see you for anything other than the color of your skin. His words settle deep in your chest, heavier than you expect. You spent so much time trying to blend in, to be a good employee, to avoid drawing attention to yourself. But Adrian's challenge lingers in your mind long after the conversation ends. What if staying silent is just another way of letting it happen? The thought is terrifying. To face this problem head on means stepping into uncomfortable territory, speaking up, taking a stand. You've never done that before. Not like this. The more you sit with it, the clearer it becomes. Adrian isn't telling you to fight every battle, to respond to every microaggression. He's telling you to reclaim your space, to demand respect, not just for your work, but for who you are. And yet, a part of you still wants to retreat. The fear is real. What if speaking up costs you something? Your peace, your job, your sense of safety. But then you ask yourself, what if staying silent costs you even more? This is your call to adventure. The only question now is, will you answer it? You spend the next few days caught in a relentless cycle of resolve and hesitation. Adrian's words echo in your mind, but the fear tightens its grip. You had always believed in proving yourself through hard work, letting your actions speak louder than your words. But what if that wasn't enough? What if silence wasn't keeping you safe, but keeping you small? The fear is real. If you speak up, will you be labeled as difficult? Will you lose the opportunities you had worked so hard for? The uneasy glances in meetings, the awkward pauses when you enter a room. You have learned to ignore them, to push forward despite them. But now, you can't unsee the quiet dismissals, the way your colleagues hesitate before acknowledging your contributions. Had they ever truly seen you at all? The burden of it presses down on you. If you stay silent, nothing will change. But the idea of speaking out feels like stepping off a ledge, with no promise of a soft landing. Every scenario plays out in your head. Retaliation, isolation, career doors closing before they even fully open. One evening, exhaustion and frustration drive you to your laptop. You scroll through job listings, wondering if a fresh start somewhere more diverse will make things easier. Was escaping the only way forward? Deep down, you know the truth. The problem wasn't just the company, it was the world. And running won't erase the reality of what you face. In university, You had learned that real growth happened in discomfort. But this wasn't an exam you could study for, a challenge you could outwork. This is the reality of life. This is about identity, about belonging, and it is far scarier than anything you had faced before. You ask yourself, are you willing to spend the rest of your life shrinking, or is it time to step forward? Adrian's words hit you harder than expected, and as you listened, you could feel something stirring inside. You had been quiet, hesitant to confront the discomfort that had plagued you for weeks, but now something shifted. Adrian's calm certainty about his own journey made you realize that you weren't alone. He had faced the same struggles, the same subtle exclusions, yet he had learned to transform those experiences into strength, not weakness. How much longer could you keep pretending that staying silent would make it all go away? Adrian's advice settled deeply within you. You don't have to fight every battle, but you don't let them make you feel invisible. The words seemed to peel back layers of fears and doubt. You've been carrying the weight of invisibility far too long, letting the quiet prejudice shape your sense of belonging. But now, it was time to stop retreating. Would you continue letting them define who you are, or could you reclaim that power for yourself? You felt a flicker of hope. His journey had been hard, but he had carved out a space for himself, thriving in an industry that wasn't designed for people like him, like you. You wondered, if Adrian could do it, why couldn't you? Maybe the path wasn't about shrinking in fear or hoping things would change. It was about stepping into the discomfort, about demanding recognition, not just for your work, but for who you are. Would you have the courage to start that journey? The decision to confront the issue head on wasn't easy for you, but you made it. In the days that followed your conversation with Adrian, doubt crept in, as it always did when you tried to change something deep inside yourself. But little by little, you began to speak up. At first, it was small, contributing to meetings without second-guessing yourself, asserting your ideas. When a colleague dismissed your presentation, you responded calmly but firmly, calling attention to the value of your work. It wasn't a big confrontation, but it felt huge to you. It was the first crack in the silence that had once defined your professional identity. You began to shift your perspective. It wasn't just about being a black man in a predominantly white office anymore. It was about owning your right to be respected for your talents, not your race. Each time you spoke, you could feel the pride growing inside you. You weren't just asking for space anymore, you were taking it. The discomfort didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled you. You crossed a threshold, and you knew there was no going back. The old ways of holding back, of staying quiet to avoid rocking the boat, didn't fit anymore. You were done with silence. The real test came when you presented a proposal at a company-wide event. It had taken hours of work, and when it was selected to be shared with the entire team, the weight of that moment hit you. Standing in front of everyone, the familiar discomfort crept in. Those looks, the disbelief. But this time, something was different. You stood tall. You didn't shrink. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to yourself that you belonged just as much as anyone else. And when your ideas were met with applause, you felt a deep sense of victory, not just for the recognition, but for overcoming the invisible barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. After your presentation, you felt a glimmer of hope, but you quickly realized the true challenge was just the beginning. The subtle biases you faced didn't disappear overnight. There were still moments of exclusion, those quiet snickers when your ideas weren't immediately accepted, the team lunches where you were the last to be included, and the fleeting glances exchanged between colleagues when you spoke up. But something had shifted within you. You had crossed the threshold, and each time you faced resistance, you reminded yourself it was part of the journey, part of the process of reclaiming your space. Throughout this period, Adrian remained your unwavering ally. He checked in regularly, offering advice and encouragement whenever you felt yourself doubting. They'll try to test you, Adrian had warned. They want to see if you'll back down, if they can make you doubt yourself. Don't let them. And you didn't. Each obstacle you faced, you confronted with Adrian's words as your guiding force. You began to recognize the allies in your office, colleagues who, though initially hesitant, started supporting you, seeing you as someone who wouldn't just shrink into the background. You weren't alone in this battle. Slowly but surely, you were building a network of support. But the enemies remained, even if they weren't always visible. You could feel them, the subtle undermining, the passive-aggressive comments, and the dismissive attitudes. Tom, in particular, was a constant source of frustration. His sarcastic remarks during meetings, or the way he dismissed your contributions with a laugh that felt deliberate, were designed to chip away at your confidence. You realized Tom wasn't just dismissing your ideas. He was trying to invalidate you as a black man, trying to carve out space in a workplace that wasn't designed for you. But despite his attempts, you kept pushing forward. With Adrian's support and the slowly growing respect of your peers, you were learning to turn each test into an opportunity to assert your worth, proving that nothing would stop you from succeeding. As the weeks turned into months, you began to feel the emotional and mental toll of your journey weigh heavily on you. Your identity as a black man in the workplace had stopped being something you could ignore or bypass. It had become central to your daily experience. For so long, you tried to blend in, to prove that you were just like everyone else. But the truth was, you weren't. You were black, and in a world where that still mattered far too much, you had to navigate a professional space shaped by racial complexities. The pressure had been building, and after a particularly exhausting day where you once again felt dismissed by your peers, you found yourself alone, reflecting on everything that had led you to this point. It was at this moment that you realized how much you had been holding back. Your efforts to fit in have forced you to suppress parts of yourself, your culture, your identity, your voice. The quiet exclusion, the microaggressions, the unspoken prejudice had piled up over time, and you could no longer ignore the growing anger and frustration you had been too afraid to confront. It wasn't just about the office anymore. It was about your place in the world, your right to exist as you truly were. You had spent so much time trying to prove yourself based on your abilities alone, but now you understood. They weren't going to see you for who you truly were until you saw yourself for who you truly were. Adrian had taught you that in this moment, it was inevitable. The moment when the emotional weight of the journey would be too much to carry in silence. The inmost cave wasn't a physical space, but the dark, heavy reality of your own identity, the confrontation with the limits of what you had been able to tolerate. You had tried for so long to navigate the world as though your race didn't matter, but now you were ready to face the truth. It did matter. And the only way to overcome the prejudice you faced was to fully embrace who you were, to shed the shame you had internalized and push through the emotional and psychological barriers that had held you back for far too long. The ordeal came unexpectedly when you were asked to lead a new project for the team. On the surface, it seemed like an opportunity, a chance to prove your capabilities and take on more responsibility. But beneath that, it felt like a test, one you weren't sure you were ready for. The project was high stakes, with the potential to bring in a significant client, and the weight of expectation from your team felt suffocating. As you prepared for the first meeting with the client, doubts crept in. You questioned whether your colleagues would take you more seriously, or if your race would be the thing they saw before your work. Despite all of your preparation and skills, you feared they will still see you as the other, the token black guy in the room. It all came to a head during the client presentation. As you spoke, you could feel the tension, the skepticism in your colleagues' eyes, the way the client seemed more focused on your appearance rather than your ideas. The moment you proposed a new direction for the campaign, there was an uncomfortable pause, followed by a dismissive remark from Tom, the same colleague who had always undermined you. Your heart raced, and the room seemed to spin as the weight of the moment descended on you. For the first time, it wasn't just frustration you felt, it was humiliation. You had worked so hard to get to this point, but in that instant, you wondered if any of it mattered. Would anyone ever see you for your work, or would you always be reduced to your race? In that moment, standing at the front of the room, that you reached your breaking point. The frustration, the exhaustion, the anger, it all surged to the surface. You wanted to walk away, to quit, to never return to that office again. But then, something shifted inside you. Adrian's words echoed in your mind, reminding you not to back down, to stand firm in face of adversity. The silence in the room felt suffocating, but instead of retreating, you took a deep breath and spoke again, more firmly this time. I understand your concerns, but I believe this is the best direction for the client, and I've got the numbers to back it up. The room went quiet. When you finished, there was a moment of recognition where your ideas weren't dismissed. They were acknowledged. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the beginning of one. The breakthrough came a few days later when you received an unexpected email from your manager, congratulating you on your presentation and the progress made on a project. It was a small victory, but for you, it felt like a weight had been lifted. Your idea had not only been accepted by the client, but had also been praised by your team for its originality and thoroughness. The validation from your colleagues felt different this time, not because of your race, but because of the work you had put in. Your thoughts shifted. This moment proved that the change Adrian had encouraged was possible. Your voice could no longer be ignored. You weren't just the other in the room. You were now seen as an integral part of the team. In the days following the project's success, you began to see things differently now. While you still faced moments of exclusion, you also noticed that some of your colleagues started to interact with you differently. They were more open conversations, more direct eye contact, more respect for your contributions. It wasn't a perfect shift. Prejudice doesn't disappear overnight, but it was progress. Adrian's mentorship had been vital in helping you understand that this was a long journey, not a singular moment of success. Each small victory, each difficult conversation was part of something bigger. You felt a newfound sense of empowerment. What was most rewarding, however, was how you began to view yourself. The pride you had in your achievement starting to feel more authentic. You were no longer just trying to prove something to others, you were proving something to yourself. You had confronted your deepest fears, fought back against the subtle racial prejudice that had once made you feel small, and stood tall in a space that wasn't designed for you. For the first time, you felt a sense of ownership over your identity in the workplace, not a product of diversity quotas, but as a skilled, capable, and valuable member of the team. And that realization was a reward you had never expected. As the project continued to move forward, you found yourself at a crossroads. The path to success no longer seemed so daunting, yet the journey was far from over. Your accomplishments were beginning to carve out a space for you in the team, but there was still a nagging feeling that deeper layers of prejudice needed to be unraveled. You knew that the next phase of your journey would require not just perseverance, but also self-awareness. The subtle biases that had been embedded in the office culture were still there, and you weren't sure how to challenge them without risking alienation. You had made strides, but could you continue to navigate the complexities of your professional world while staying true to who you were? It was around this time that Adrian checked in with you again, and then the conversation came to a turning point. "You're doing great, Marcus," Adrian said with a reassuring smile. "But don't let the winds get to your head. The road back is about more than just proving you belong. It's about knowing when to lead, when to stay silent, and when to call people out. They'll respect you more when you show them that you respect yourself. You had spent so much time fighting for recognition, for space, that you hadn't fully considered how important it was to preserve your own self-respect." Adrian's words gave you a new perspective on your ongoing journey. This wasn't just about being accepted in the office. It was about setting boundaries, knowing when to challenge the system, and, perhaps most importantly, never compromising on your identity. The road back was not without its challenges. You still faced resistance from some colleagues, and moments of doubt crept in, but you had learned to trust yourself more. You didn't need to force your way in. You had already proven your worth. The key now was to continue being consistent, to continue showing up, and to continue taking a high road in the face of subtle bias. Your journey was evolving from one constant struggle to one of quiet confidence. You were no longer just fighting to survive in the office. You were reclaiming your space in a way that felt more sustainable and true to who you were. The final test came during a quarterly review where all employees were asked to present their progress and achievements over the past few months. It was a formal setting, an opportunity to either solidify your place within the company or risk being overlooked. You had been dreading this moment since you first started at the company, but now, with your recent victories behind you, you found yourself in a very different headspace. As you prepared your presentation, you realized that this wasn't just another chance to prove your skills. This was a chance to show them, once and for all, that you belonged, not just because of your work, but because of your identity, your values, and the growth you had experienced. As you stood before your colleagues, you felt a quiet surge of confidence. You spoke about the challenges you had faced in the company, not in an angry or resentful way, but as a statement of fact. You acknowledged how hard it had been to navigate the unspoken racial dynamics, and how, through perseverance, you had found your place. It wasn't easy to speak about your experiences so openly, but you realized that this moment wasn't just about your performance, it was about claiming your truth. The room was silent as you spoke, and when you finished, there was a palpable shift. It wasn't a grandstanding moment, but it was a moment of transformation for you. You had transcended the fear of being seen as the other, and instead stood before them as someone who was not only competent, but unapologetically himself. The road back to self-acceptance wasn't immediate, and the fight against prejudice wasn't over, but you had risen, not just in the eyes of your colleagues, but in your own. You had overcome the emotional toll of feeling invisible, of doubting your worth, of questioning your place in the world. You had learned to stand tall, not because you needed others to recognize you, but because you had come to recognize yourself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but you knew one thing for sure. You would no longer allow anyone to define you except for yourself. Your transformation didn't just impact you, it rippled through the team. In the months that followed, your confidence grew even stronger, and with it, your ability to influence change. You took the lessons learned from your journey and began to apply them in your personal life. You started speaking up in meetings, not just for yourself, but for others who were too afraid to challenge the status quo. And while the office wasn't perfect, the subtle biases still existed, you had become a force for positive change. Your relationship with Adrian deepened, and you no longer were just a mentee. You had become a mentor in your own right. You had learned that overcoming prejudice was not just about fighting battles for the sake of winning. It was about showing up, embracing who you were, and pushing forward even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Adrian's lessons had stayed with you, but now you were beginning to teach them to others, passing on the elixir of resilience, self-respect, and strength. And through it all, you realized that your journey wasn't just about your career or about fighting racism. It was about growing into the person you were meant to be. The emotional hurdles you had overcome, the internal struggles you had to face, had all brought you closer to a deeper understanding of yourself. As you looked back on your journey, you could finally say with certainty that you had transformed. You were no longer just surviving in the workplace, you were thriving, and you had reclaimed your space, not just in the office, but in the world. In life, we all face struggles, but that does not mean we are alone in them. By learning to harness your own inner strength, you too can overcome self-doubt and triumph over adversity. If you've ever faced a similar battle, know that you are not alone. You are part of a shared journey. Feel free to share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help others feel seen and understand that there is always hope, even in the darkest of places. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated with the modern hero's journey. Thank you for listening.